Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this online alumni panel discussion examining how sustainability is changing the global labour markets. I'm Alice Aikman, Alumni Relations Manager at Rotterdam School of Management, and tonight's session marks the beginning of RSM's Alumni Careers Week, which is a new initiative from RSM Alumni Relations Office designed to provide career support to our alumni community with a full week of online and in-person discussions, masterclasses, careers advice and networking. If you're in the Netherlands, there are still tickets available for our in-person event at RSM on Friday, so I hope you can join us for that. Just before we get started with the discussion, I need to inform you that this session will be recorded and shared after the event. And if you have any questions during the discussion, please enter them into the Q&A box. We will not be using the chat box for questions, so please take a moment to find the Q&A box in your menu now. And you'll be able to vote for questions that you see in the Q&A box to give us an indication of the most popular questions. So that's all from me. I will hand over to Thom van Amersfoort, who will be hosting and moderating tonight's discussion. Over to you, Thom.
Yes, thank you. A very warm welcome to everybody, and especially everybody in the Netherlands. It's pretty warm around here. Welcome in this interesting panel on the topics, is sustainability changing the global labor market? As Alice was already saying, my name is Thom van Amersfoort and I will be your moderator for today. And I was very enthusiastic when they asked me to moderate this, since I recently graduated. I graduated in 2021. So I'm also very new to the labor market. And I heard that from everybody who is now in the session. Most of you are either not on the job market yet or very new to the job market. So therefore today will be a very interesting discussion on sustainability. We have structured today in three main parts to give you a broad perspective and insights on this topic. And first we will talk about the broader industry and how the panelists see that industry change. Then we dive into the trends and shifts, how these shifts are changing the job markets. And finally, we look into what skills and what competencies are needed related to that. And after each round, we have room for some Q&A. As I would like to reiterate, use the Q&A box for that, because those questions we will use and not the questions in the chat box. So it's designed for that, and after each session in order to keep it interactive. So let me introduce our interesting panelists who know a lot more about this topic than me. We have Celia Kieser, CPO and Managing Partner at Nextio Projects, Dr. David Friedman, Head of Global Marketing for General Industries at Dietweiler AG and Conjunct Professor at EU Business School in Geneva and SPA in Lille. And Natalie Gross, Head of Global Communications at Kemira, a global chemicals company. So thank you all for being here. First of all, I would like to ask you, the panelists, to quickly introduce yourself a bit further. And with that, what roles have you already taken on regarding sustainability? And what was the demand for sustainability when you started working, especially in comparison to today? Celia, can I start with you?
Yes, it sounds like it would be a very long time gap between when I entered the market and now. It's not that long. So actually, just taking a step back, I studied at RSM. I did my international business administration bachelor, followed by a master in marketing management. In between my studies, I also worked for Accenture and Unilever, actually in Rotterdam, in human resources. And then I thought this is not for me and went into the sports world. So we have Natalie with us, who did a triathlon yesterday. I'm all full up for that because I come from the sports world myself. And I started in merchandising, and then a bit more into merchandising strategy as I went throughout the years at Adidas. And one of the elements that really attracted me to the organization and actually staying for a few years was how sustainability was embedded, but more from a healthy mindset, well-being perspective, rather than obviously creating clothes and demand for fashionable items. That's also one of the reasons why I changed and then actually moved to Switzerland and worked in Geneva for Columbia Sportswear. Before, I thought that the trade-off was too big for me to at least I was promoting well-being, but at the same time, you know, selling clothes. So I decided to hop on and join Nextyear Projects as a head of people and managing partner in Rotterdam, actually, which we are a sustainability consultancy firm. And I've seen a big change already in the last 2.5 years that I've been at Nextyear Projects, especially from the younger generations. Also happy to see that that's part of the call, but also very interestingly, I'm super drawn to kind of those people who have been on the marketplace and, since actually those sustainability jobs did not exist, and looking on how to do lateral moves. And I think that's super brave and actually very interesting to see how we can reuse some of the skill sets and redirect that in a way. Bit more than an introduction, but
no, that's great. That's great, because now we know your background and also can relate to that. So thank you very much. Natalie, can you maybe also explain your story a bit on that part?
Certainly. My I would say sustainability journey from a professional perspective started as far back as my bachelor's, where I already started doing sort of my major was in sustainable development. Then I continued to focus on sustainability when I did my first master's. And I think also around that time, now we're going back till about, don't let me lie, about my age, maybe 2007 or so. And for me, the turn actually where sustainability for me became my perception of it really became a mainstream event was around that time. I started writing my master's thesis about nuclear energy and sustainability measurement criteria. And I felt like at some point it was maybe that summer where all over CNN and other places, they were really starting to talk about green things everywhere. I continued on my path for a really long time in consulting. At that time, I did sustainability and social impact work from anywhere from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to Levi's. Then went to trade association and then went in-house to corporate, but also a startup in between, where my role has always been very much focused on sustainability and social impact. But also looking at it from very different perspectives. And now also having a very sort of focused role also in my current job that I started in January as head of global communications at Chimera.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Natalie. David, can you maybe tell your story?
Sure. Well, my journey is maybe a longer one. If I go back a little bit in time, I'm originally from Canada and worked in some financial services institutions in Canada, and then did my MBA at Rotterdam. I'm actually a graduate from full-time 2001. So I'll come back to that in a moment in terms of how things have evolved since, what is it now, about 22 years ago, as things have changed quite a bit. My parcours, though, has been working through various B2B and B2C companies, industrials, automotive, agricultural machinery, some consultancy work, all the way through to professorship in marketing today, both in Geneva and in Lille in France. And I would say, just to cut to the point, that if I compare back, and I think this is maybe interesting for some of the folks now in Rotterdam on the line, the world when I graduated in 2001 as it relates to sustainability topics, and the world today, as far as I'm concerned, it's two very different worlds. Not to say that themes around environmental concerns, societal concerns, or some of the underlying governance around, if I think about ESG, were not topics at the time. They were, but the codification of that and the importance of that, as I've seen in my various marketing roles, as an example, where more and more, we've come to a point where we don't necessarily talk about sustainable marketing as such, but rather about marketing where it's assumed that there is an element to it where we must speak about sustainability as well as look to the sustainability of our own efforts. That's become the norm. And I would maybe echo what Natalie was saying, that that watershed moment for me, I think, would have been somewhere, yes, I would say maybe a little bit later, somewhere in the mid-teens, when I launched the Nissan Leaf, an electric car for Nissan here in Switzerland, where I'm speaking right now. And that was where you started to see and understand just how some of these considerations were actually becoming near and dear to the consumer, which maybe were not so apparent previously. So certainly the world, Thom, has evolved, in my view anyways, significantly, certainly from a European perspective, if not globally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I think that's a nice bridge to our first topic, the industries, and how has it changed that. Natalie, maybe you can topple the first question for us. What key changes do you see in this industry with regards to sustainability and talking, also moving on from what David said before?
Sure. I mean, I can speak a little bit from two perspectives. I think one on the sort of corporate function, if that's what you mean, and then maybe also one in terms of manufacturing. Is that what you think, or do you think a transition of sort of sustainability over time?
Well, please speak from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think when I started, it was a very, very different world. David just said it as well. It wasn't something that, topics were there. I think when I started studying in my bachelor's, so if we think back to the early 2000s, we were still referring back to literature like Silent Spring, things going back to the 70s, that were really giving us sort of the direction of how we would think about these kind of topics. Then when I entered, you had, or when I started working in the space and finishing my studies, you had things like BP, which was British Petroleum, turned to Beyond Petroleum, and everything on their website was all about renewable energies. One could argue how sincere that really was at the time. So in comes, I would almost say, greenwashing. It was an opportunity to claim sustainability, to claim greenness, but maybe not make the changes that were as necessary. And I think over time, that's really picked up on the international scale, when you have the expertise and the research gaining more traction towards the consumer, the growth of accountability, and ultimately where it's taken us now. So I would say it was kind of greenwashing. It was a bit of being able to claim the space. It's sort of evolved. And I think where we are now, or if I also maybe say just a few years ago, it was also about who would kind of have the best sustainability report, the coolest looking, the most inspirational. And I think really where we are now is that it's coming down to data and radical transparency. So I really think that's where the focus is from my perspective. If we're looking at, we earlier in a group also spoke about sort of the B2B element, and a lot of the work is measuring your impact, really being able to prove the changes that you're making, how your changes fit into certain scenarios and limits. Then I would also say how all connected companies are and activities across industries, and trying to create transparency there. And that's where we see a lot of the work and sort of scope 3, and everyone trying to sort of measure and help each other. And now we see, if we want to be green, whoever we buy from has to be green. And that means everyone sort of has to work really hard on measuring their impact, measuring everything that they do. And that's why I say it's really focused on data and radical transparency, because you have to change. And that's also going to be your qualifier to be able to participate in the market further down the line.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Celia, do you see it like that as well? Also relating to maybe the greenwashing parts, that the data and the radical transparency are really now the key differences, maybe in relation to before, regarding to how corporate are making sure that they're not considered to be greenwashing?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I think a very important word from Natalie is around accountability. So it's about also the breadth of your accountability, looking at your must as an organization, but the breadth now being wider and wider throughout the entire value chain and supply chain. That is not just you and your organization, but everything from upstream and downstream. And I think that's very linked to blockchain, to transparency of data, etc., is to look at a wider kind of more collaborative approach than just you and your business. And more than that, being also kind of a proactive approach to it for some organizations. I think a large difference is also what we're seeing with rules, regulations, just everything around CSRD. We have the TCFD as well. We have just a lot of rules and regulations out there that, you know, it could be a proactive approach for some businesses, but it really becomes a must for others in regards to reporting, for example, in CSRD, where in the next 5 years, some really radical changes need to happen in showcasing your reporting, in general. So I think those are very valid points and across all industries, actually.
Yeah. David, maybe you want to add to that, to the key changes?
Yeah, I think I'll surf a bit on what both Natalie and Celia are saying. I mean, I think that the comment on, for example, you know, transparency, I think we can even add to that and say transparency combined with an increasing demand that transparency also shows authenticity. And that's something that I think as well has, coming back to the point about greenwashing, become more and more of a demand, a consumer demand, a much more savvy consumer on the B2C or on the B2B side. That is requiring companies to be able to very credibly put forward what actions and what activities are taking place with transparency, with authenticity, and with proper governance. And to the point about Celia, also taking that broader 360 view approach. You know, in Debt for example, you know, we're very proud why we're in the top, you know, 5th percentile for EcoVadis. Okay, well, what are one of the 4 critical criteria for how EcoVadis will rank a company's standing? It will be about the sustainable sustainable procurement. That's an important point, taking a broader view fuller down the chain. So I think those aspects are becoming much more critical as we're moving forward. And I come back always to that point about authenticity and what that means for the broader stakeholders as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, my next question is more about then the specific industries and the specific sectors that are maybe are undergoing significant transformation in terms of sustainability, but also labor market directions. Natalie, can you maybe put your thoughts on that?
So how it's impacting the labor market?
Yeah, so which specific industries or sectors you see a lot of change going on?
I think the change is happening everywhere, from sort of big and small to all kinds. And I don't think that there's any specific sort of industry or so that is going to somehow not have to adjust to some of the changes in how they do things. Obviously, some are going to be hit a little bit harder. So any kind of industry sectors that are deemed as unsustainably or massively unsustainable are obviously going to be much more challenged. So I think my answer there is everyone in some shape or form is going to be impacted with the movement in sustainability. And I think you also have to think about that sustainability isn't just about environmental impacts. It's also about social topics. You know, right now everyone's really focusing a lot on D, E, and I, or some just calling it D and I. And so everyone has to account for those type of standards throughout.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting points. Celia and David, do you want to comment on that? Do you see specific sectors or industries growing a lot because of it, or is it maybe, as Natalie also said, really across the board?
Yeah, I was looking at more at the other approach, like which industries and sectors are more at risk. And actually, I thought that was an interesting question, how that links to the labor market. And just an example kind of popped to mind when I was reading through that question. And it was actually when I was sitting on those benches at RSM during my bachelor's, when actually one of the most prestigious traineeships to be part of was a cigarette company, where they would come and they would join our traineeship, 2 years, you're gonna love it, you're gonna, and there were a tremendous amount of application. It was rounds and rounds and days of like hard work, like debates, etc. And I was thinking, actually, if that first of all would still be the case, that a university really wants to promote such an industry at the forefront, or even if that still has so much kind of appetite and hooray around it. And I think these kind of industries, and we got approached at Next Year Projects from a cigarette manufacturer, and we have a ethics committee and anti-greenwashing protocol. So we have a very thorough vetting process in place, and of which the employees are part of. And it's interesting to see how kind of the transition of those industries. And I'm talking about 2010, but obviously the 70s, the 60s, 80s, I can't even imagine what kind of radical transformation it was in regards to those years. But I'm sure that it is hitting hard for some industries. And it's really looking at also the potential greenwashing linked to projects that could be linked to circularity in those industries as well, but still taking it from a very serious approach onto how the steps are to go forward. So I think, of course, some industries are thriving. We're seeing everything around sustainable fashion. Yet again, I think we need to be very alert on what that actually means and how they are providing the changes. Sustainability consultancy as well. There are a lot of domains that are really thriving through it, but others that really need to reinvent themselves in the process.
David, what is your take on that? Do you have anything?
No, I mean, I think both Silly and Natalie summarized it well. I think it's perhaps even a mix of two elements. One is, as Natalie said, absolutely, this is something which is working across all industries. All industries are transforming. Although, of course, there are some which are being hit more than others. If you're making internal combustion engines, for example, that's probably going to be a more tricky place to be moving forward than not. I mean, I think that's self-evident. But I think to take it from a different angle, and it comes back to the points before about transparency. The word sustainability can be thrown around. We can get very lazy about it in a way. I think where the haves and have-nots or the winners and losers, I think it will be as much about the industry one is in, because everyone is having to change, as to how well one is able, and I come back to the word before, how one is able to be transparent. That ability, for example, to show, for example, the provenance of what it is that you sell, the elements within that you sell, to be able to work back and show on the chain, what goes into what you create. Those aspects, I think, will separate very much, even in an industry which, we would say overall, yes, it's on the up. I think that will be a critical factor in separating those who grow and those who do not. It links to transparency and ultimately comes back to that word from before, authenticity. So I think there's a few nuances as well worth thinking about when we look at some of these industries and how they move forward.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, all of you, from these very interesting perspectives, and where we see that changes are happening across the entire industry, and we should really focus on that radical transparency, that accountability. I would like to open quickly the floor also to some questions. Alice, do you have some questions from our audience on the topic of the broader industries?
Yes, on the industries, we received one question. Do you see sustainability roles moving beyond simply advising the C-suite, particularly for companies that aren't selling sustainability?
Celia, can you maybe answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Being in a sustainability consultancy, of course, the buy-in needs to come from the top. We see that there is really a limited ripple effect if it doesn't come with a clear messaging, because that needs to be linked to a vision, to a strategy, to a build down of actions with the red threads in between. But of course, it's interesting, we do, especially he was talking about, David was talking about EcoVadis. We support some of our clients. Some of the most simple support that we do is, for example, helping with an EcoVadis assessment. You can have all of the C-suite educated people who understand everything around ESG, what is involved into it, the weight of procurement versus environment, etc. And then we talk to kind of the head of the factory in the middle of Italy, who doesn't know about sustainability. He just knows that he's been forced to be in an interview to talk about something to make apparently the planet a bit better. But it's all about, that educational perspective, I think, is very important, because having the buy-in of someone that has maybe a lower level of education or a lower level in just hierarchy to understand why certain elements are important, and then seeing what is the accountability again of you as a person in that. Usually it's in the beginning just providing transparency on data and reporting in order to assess kind of where the company stands. But once that transforms into actions and that elements need to be set in place, then those people, of course, need to be on board as well. So I think it's really all across the board, but there needs to be a very clear messaging from C-suite linked to kind of incentives as well to everyone to collaborate on that, because if it's just C-suite, it wouldn't work. If it's just a sustainability manager who's trying to kind of coordinate, then that doesn't work either. So it's really about working together.
David and Natalie, do you have anything to add to that question about the C-suite and how it goes beyond the C-suite at this point?
David, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, sure. Thanks.
You go first.
Well, it comes back to some of the comments made earlier on that we're talking about, when we talk about sustainability with all the dimensions that it has, and I think Natalie was very right to point out that there's more than just the ecological aspect, the environmental aspect. There's the social aspect. There's the people management aspect as well, for example. So when you start to really think through and think, well, wait a minute, no, as long as we're all in agreement that sustainability is now just part of the dialogue, it's not a thing off to the left or off to the right, then suddenly what one realizes that in any of your roles, you have to have some sensitivity to some of the basics. So you can look at, there's such a thing called green skills, for example, from one of the UN agencies. They talk about specific skills around operational management, around monitoring capabilities, one's capabilities around science, or for that matter, or engineering, all true. But on top of that, you can also talk about the need for people skills as well to create an environment which, if we think from a social standpoint, is creating the kind of inclusive environment that is part of, when we talk more broadly, part of sustainability. So I think, by no means just think about something from the C-suite. Celia is right. The C-suite, if you don't have that understanding and buy-in, then you may not have, things may not progress. But just my advice to those who are on the line this evening, or depending on where you are this morning, would be consider sustainability as part and parcel of whatever you do in any of your roles moving forward. I think that's the clearest advice that I can give.
Thanks. That's very interesting. And building on that, we already moving a bit towards our second topic, that's jobs, and how traditional jobs are being transformed into related to sustainability principles and practices. And maybe Natalie, you can comment on that, like how you see that the traditional jobs are actually changing in that sense.
Sure. I think David just said it, that it's everywhere, and it's in everything that we do now, which means every part, be it from HR, be it to those on the manufacturing floor, all somewhere, somehow are going to be touched by sustainability. Just again, to level set that sustainability also, it's the social, it's the human topics, it's the environmental impacts, and something that falls under this is also, for example, worker safety. So that's also well-being topics. So that's all part of that. So of course you have the technical know-how, which is changing. So a lot of the technical information, from a strategy perspective, how do you factor in sustainability and a much longer term thinking, which is also necessary, and changing the shape of your business, what's happening in many times. And then there's, of course, the part about how do you actually drive this forward. And so I would think one of the significant changes, and something that, and I also don't want to jump too far ahead and really kind of stay focused on the question, but one of the things that is really, I think, important when looking at sustainability jobs, it's the hard stuff, it's the technical, it's being able to analyze the data and the numbers and that knowledge. But then also, something David said, there's a soft skill involved here. And it also links back to the question that we were just asked from the audience, is there's a lot of stakeholder management involved. It's a lot of cross business units. It's basically everything connects and everything has to move together to be able to move, to sort of drive these things forward. I'm in a really exceptional position as no one always necessarily thinks of that, in communications play a really big role in trying to connect sometimes our EHSQ with our corporate sustainability, with our strategy, with our HR team, and really trying to bring all those pieces together to be able to kind of, as a whole, change the company's position on something, or be able to progress on what we're doing internally on DE&I, or how we're actually implementing our SBTI program and things like that.
Awesome, thank you for that. Celia, can you maybe also say something about your perspective from a consulting perspective, perhaps?
Yeah, I find it quite a difficult question, to be honest, because I had a bit of a similar answer that I was looking at the whole element of collaboration being at the forefront. And I don't know if it's very kind of idealistic from my side, but I think that more and more it's changing jobs because it's also connecting with something higher than, you know, you yourself as an ego and as a person, and looking at really with that element that David was talking about, authenticity. I feel like companies more and more really want to define what does that mean to be our authentic self or our authentic company, and how each individual and employee is related to that. But that being said, it could be because I'm in this sustainability consultancy bubble as well. But I'm seeing also from our clients more and more really do have that motivation to go forward and to be a better employer. And I think there's another question related to that of like, what does a job mean tomorrow? And what does a job mean today? I think Gen Z, you know, like I love all those crazy articles about like, this generation, they don't know what hard work is, etc. I just think it's a very different way of looking at work, and maybe a healthier way in regards to how I came into the workforce, being quite like driven by fear of being good at my job and pleasing. But of course, there's going to be a balance at the end, I believe. But looking at what does a job mean, traditional or non-traditional, a healthy work-life balance, but linked to also hard work and having kind of a common purpose and building towards that purpose. And I think the more that organizations kind of go towards that, the more that this, I can see an abundant future, let's say. But in regards to kind of collaboration would be key in terms of how differently people and sustainability are interrelated in traditional jobs, so to say, but also I would say the focus. And when you look at the financial sector, it's very different how PE firms look now at investment portfolios, where really there are some quantitative metrics that are embedded into where to invest and where not to invest in regards to non-financial reporting. So that's kind of, something I was thinking about.
Yeah. Awesome, interesting. And David, you talked about procurement, of course. Maybe you can talk a bit more about that in your experience. Like, how has those roles relating to that shifted from their like a normal or traditional type of job towards like a more sustainability focused job in that sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think it comes back to the point earlier that, you know, all we can talk about roles which are, let's say, more classically focused on sustainability, working as a sustainability manager or what have you. But if we take procurement as a great example, that is a role that has always existed. Mm-hmm. And we speak here, also within an industrial, setting, but not necessarily. The capabilities that someone now requires, the sensitivities, the understanding that someone requires in an industrial situation, in order to be able to evaluate and understand the capabilities and, let's say, sustainability credibility of the suppliers to one's own company is a factor which has become a critical success factor for most companies, because many are being evaluated on this. And quite frankly, coming back to that point about transparency and the consumer desire to understand, the provenance of where potentially elements that come into what ultimately is their final product for them, where that is coming from, has created significant new demands or evolving demands on a role that yes, perhaps maybe 15 years ago was more focused on how do I secure the necessary elements to be able to, meeting against, cost, quality, as my, number one, number two. Now we bring in this other aspect as well, which is, how am I able to bring in elements of cost, quality, but also responsibility and understanding and knowing that what I am buying from my suppliers, that my suppliers themselves are taking on the same ethical standards that I have. This is a big deal. Mm. And so I would come back to the overall theme for those who are on the call today to say, think broadly when we talk about sustainability, because it plays a part in, as far as I'm concerned, any role we can speak of today. And arguably, your sensitivity to it can also be something of a differentiator vis-a-vis others who might be looking for a similar position as you. It can be very powerful.
And relating to that, and maybe on a more serious note, are there also specific jobs and roles that are becoming obsolete or declining because of this? Natalie, maybe you can talk to us a bit about that. Do you see any roles or any parts that are becoming less interesting, and which our audience have to think about as well?
Anyone working in oil and gas? At a technical level, yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I think some roles will evolve. I think there it's going to be really much linked to industries that end up either, you know, not really playing a role in the future industrial mix of the world. Any roles within that, you know, it depends. Some expertise is transferable, right? It's about transferable skills, transferable knowledge. If you're looking at, for example, agriculture, unsustainable agriculture practices are going to become obsolete, hopefully. But arguably, those will then also, you know, some of those skills are transferable to also doing things more sustainably. So I think what will be obsolete is obviously certain jobs that are really in the category of industries and sectors that just don't really play a role in the future.
Being future-proof.
That's right.
David, Celia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at like which jobs become obsolete because of just no need in the marketplace, but also on like which jobs do candidates are not going to want to work for anymore either. So it's interesting to see it from both sides a little bit. I speak to candidates every day and they really make a conscious decision. You know, you spend 8 hours a day working for something. Do you want that to be linked to an industry that's really not going the right direction? And actually, that being said, I was actually speaking a panel speaker at HEC Paris, and I was on the panel with Schneider Electrics, and you know they're one of the biggest, also you know reputable. They have EcoVadis Gold, they have all of the standards regulations. They have gone through quite a transition and still going through. And you had a lot of students who had like those pamphlets and were like, yeah, Schneider Electric, like horrible thing you've done in Ghana in 1992, etc. And all of these things are true. And but I think it's also, you know, there's never a white and a black, like there's really a gray zone in everything. And of course there's a transition, of course there's accountability, but there's also the reality. And I was very much so when I was there, I was like, yeah, you go with those pamphlets. But afterwards I was thinking about it again. I was like, okay, but there's a need for time to go through a transition. And it's not always a bad or a good thing to be part of an industry or not another. And I think that's what Natalie was saying a little bit earlier as well. It's all about what do you do within that role, and also what is the vision, and also that there is no greenwashing involved, right? That there are really pure KPIs, that they're part of SBTI target setting or any of those elements that really show that transition going forward. But I do think that going back to the initial point, that there's a bit of a pull and give and take between the jobs that will become obsolete because of the nature of them, or also because of just candidates really seeking for something specific.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Alice, on the job part, do we have some questions from the audience?
Yes. Are companies willing to invest in sustainability despite the current economic conditions?
David, maybe I can pass that question to you.
Sure. The short answer is yes. I don't think there's much of a question mark around that. Let's put it a different way. It's a bit of a factoid, but you know, there was something that McKinsey had spoken of recently. They did a study, and they basically were looking at studies on the link between those companies which are committed to ESG and to actually achieving ESG goals and profitability. And basically, out of those, they spoke of 2,000 studies that they looked at. Of those 2,000 studies, there was approximately 70% of those studies which did show a link. So one could argue that, never mind just for questions of employee well-being, societal well-being, environmental well-being. There is also a business case here. There's a long-term business case. And for that reason, I think as much as for some of the broader considerations, I don't see companies moving away from this, notwithstanding any kind of economic situation. It just doesn't make any sense, not anymore.
Thank you for that. Natalie, Celia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think maybe just the point, because we spoke earlier about so absolutely agree on all those. Absolutely, that's correct. You have to think about it also that several years ago, that was a question, like, is it worth it? It is part of your being able to future-proof a business. It's required. You're just at a different place. And it's not just about investing. It's a whole new different kind of working that is being applied. And for example, if you're a supplier and you're not able to kind of keep up with it, who you're supplying is gonna stop working with you. Because they're going to want suppliers who provide transparency, who are evolving in their product portfolio and what they offer and things like that. But also, if you look at the topic of the workplace, if you want to have, and there is also data about this, is if you want a productive workforce, if you want a happy workforce, you're going to invest in the people side of it. I keep coming back to DE&I because that's also just something that's very top of mind for me, and what we're also doing for want our employees to really have where I'm at currently. But that's a strong topic, and that's also a part of sustainability. If you want a good labor force and you want to attract the best of the best, you're going to have to offer something, and that's going to be a certain kind of workplace and a certain type of Celia, you mentioned it also, that people also want to work for a company that's going to be purpose driven and do something well. That's also part of that equation.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. Alice, are there any other questions?
Yes, I have one more. There were a couple of extra questions, but they're very, very specific, industry specific. So I think we'll leave those to the end and answer them if we get time. But this last one for the moment is, as industry professionals, are you happy with the current level of progress in sustainability, or do you believe there is room for improvement, and what areas could be enhanced further?
Very interesting question. I'm going to pass it on to you, Celia.
Yeah. So am I firstly happy with the progress? Obviously, I want to say no, because I want things to go, faster. But on the other side, I do think that taking the time to have that educational part of it is very important in order for it to be authentic, for it to be long lasting, and at the end of the day, for it to be sustainable. So of course, I would want to see it go faster. I think regulations, rules, like you can see from CSRD, for example, there are new things coming forward and they're backtracking a little bit. They're also going forward in other things. So it's interesting to see how that will evolve. And of course, there's the whole lobbying perspective on the side, but this is obviously a much bigger topic. But organizations themselves, I believe they need to take the time to go through the organic gradual trajectory that they need to go in order to really understand the change and to embed the change in a way that it's long-term. We have some clients coming to us that are, in a panic, like, okay, I want to calculate everything, but they don't even understand what they want to calculate, looking not only at the environmental side of it, which is obviously the first part that everyone thinks about. Sustainability equals carbon emissions calculations, but also looking at it from the governance side. So what does that mean in the construction of your organization? And also from the social side, of course, so DI, but also, all types of it linked to roles, right? And also ethics, for example. So I think I would like to see more of a transition. I would like to see more of a push coming from, regulatory standards, etc. But at the same time, I really believe that the time is being taken for a reason, and I hope so. And that's what I love about our organization, is that we're able to support our clients through that trajectory. But I don't think that rushing it is a right answer either.
David and Natalie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you want to go this time? I'll take it afterwards if there's anything more to add. Please, over to you this time, if you wish.
Well, I mean, I've been into sustainability almost like as a little kid, and would put posters through our house about save the planet. And so I could, from my own personal perspective, I obviously wish we would be much further. That being said, things are going so fast, and sometimes I think so fast that we're missing some very critical things in the process. I think when we're working on sustainability, it's really important that the regulatory part, the industry part, the civil society part really works together a little bit more, because we're going at such speed sometimes that we're not really evaluating, clearly what we're proposing and the kind of frameworks we're putting out there, and all the different individual frameworks that are happening are actually creating a lot of confusion in the space of sustainability. My answer to that question is, I wish it would go faster in terms of the commitments for change. So maybe it's less about speed, but really more about ambition, about accepting the fact that the industry or the world, I would say industries across the board, really have to rethink what industries are going to look like later. And these are concepts and unpopular opinions sometimes, but about capping growth, making really radical choices about what kind of parts of businesses to really stop doing. So really making really big steps in change. But that being said, considering where we were just when I kind of started on this journey to where we are now, companies are really trying to navigate the space, which is sometimes very difficult because there's a lot of noise and a lot of different things going on.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I want to continue to the next part, the jobs part, because of the time as well. So this question is going to be for you, David. So how can the individuals and the audience over here, and job seekers, proactively prepare themselves for the changing job market, driven by this sustainability change that we see, and that we sometimes wish to go faster, but also should be go at a very sustainable pace as well?
It's a big question, but I think it's probably near and dear to a lot of the folks who are on the call today. So how can you prepare? Maybe I come back to a comment made a bit earlier on. A starting point here is to very much understand, for whatever role you are looking to apply for, and just accept that sustainability or understanding some of the basics is part and parcel of what will be expected of you. And preparing for that, understanding what is the intersection between the three dimensions of sustainability that we're talking about and the role that you would be applying for. And I don't speak of a role, specifically, as I said, as a sustainability manager or in some kind of very specific role or consultancy. I speak more broadly in whatever industry you wish. I think having a clear understanding, doing your homework and understanding where that intersection is and where you in that role, because picking up from some of the comments earlier, all companies, as I think Natalie was saying as well, all companies are right now making their way through, and Celia was making the same point. Everyone is trying to figure out how to navigate. No one has the answer. Any company that would say, we're champions, we got this, I would be very skeptical. It comes back to the authenticity point. Humility is actually a very powerful and very positive thing in the world of sustainability, in my view. But you understanding as an applicant where you can help the company in your role, help them achieve their core goals, I think will make the difference. And if you can verbalize that and tangibly explain how the skills that you will have picked up in Rotterdam, which you will have picked up skills that can help, I think that can make for a very powerful presentation of yourself when you're putting yourself in front of a company. So that would be my starting point as a piece of advice.
Celia, can you add to that maybe?
Yeah. No, actually, I think that's a really great point. And for me, the element of authenticity and how it links to yourself is super important. And half of the candidates I speak are like, why do you want to work for sustainability? Why do you want to work in sustainability? I want to make an impact. But what does impact mean to you? And then it's like, oh no, I wasn't waiting on that question. So it's really about finding deep down, what does that mean for you? The contribution you want to make, in what sense? It can be something very specific. Our vision at Nextio is ... in an abundant world, because I really want people to individually think about, what does an abundant world mean to you? Some people it's supporting my community in the bush of Australia. Some it's about voicing DI and making sure that transgender people feel very at home in the workplace. And it can be something very specific, and making it bigger really connects you to kind of the reasons why you would want these type of jobs, and then making it easier for you as well to actually build that resilience throughout your career in a certain way. At least for me, it really does help. On a more practical sense, because I know being part of these kind of calls, I was always looking for some, tips and tricks.
Practical tips.
Yeah, practical tips. There are a lot of newsletters out there that can really help for you to understand what the regulations are evolving, how they are going. There's the Bcorp, they have some really great articles. There's McKinsey that has a great newsletter every week, I think, that comes out with, it's a very sustainability driven. If you haven't done sustainability studies, there are a lot of courses. I don't want to talk about another university, but like there's Bocconi that did one on Coursera about introduction to sustainability. That's very good. And of course, if you have some more experience, then there are some more like thorough academic courses that you can follow. But I think knowing some of the elements of the sustainability kind of sphere is very important in order to understand what kind of roles you want, first of all, and also which ones you're eligible for, and also to showcase kind of your interest and your knowledge to your future employer.
Awesome, thank you for those tips and tricks as well. I think the audience really appreciate that. Natalie, to continue on this, what do you think specific skills or qualifications that are increasingly now in demand as a result from this shift that we are going to experience?
So I maybe want to circle back a little bit to a point that I made earlier about this balance between the technical and soft skill, which I think is really important. So you can get lots of certifications. I think and this was also my learning personally, especially kind of leaving the consulting world and actually coming into corporate and business and seeing what that perspective is. It's a very different world. I even think that maybe when I entered corporate life, I kind of realized that the first half of my career when I was in consulting, I never really quite understood my clients actually. So it's different, and there are different things that are needed to drive sustainability forward. So and I think it's also a really exciting place to be when you're taking a company that maybe wasn't sustainable in the past and they're on that journey of change, rather than also maybe just wanting to seek out the companies that are already green or in the green business, right? There's so many different places where an impact can be achieved. But so I think being in a company is really when you learn the change. I remember 15 years ago, we weren't really talking about green jobs this way. So there's loads of learning, and it's great to learn in company. So there's a learning part, and then there's a get your hands dirty and go and learn together with the organization. So do it on the job as well. But I think my biggest thing there is that when it comes to skills is understanding the technical stuff, understanding the regulatory elements more broadly, understanding the basic frameworks, the principles of sustainability. So having a knowledge of sustainability. Of course, there's benefits of understanding green supply chains and greener logistics, and being able to read data, one may say it. And then the other skill would really be about the soft stuff, in being able to do the stakeholder engagement within your organization, outside of your organization, taking people along on the journey. Sustainability is such a big conversation that we sometimes either we're really jaded about it and think no one really cares, or we think that people or companies and organizations are a lot further on their journey because that's what we assume, because it's such a important topic. But it's really important to take, as this is a transition time, to take people and parts of the business along on the journey. So I think the balance between the technical hard skills and the soft skills is really, really important.
Awesome, thank you. David, you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Natalie summarized it very, very well. It's a balance of the two. I mean, I can only add the point about those skills, and as I said earlier on as well, how they specifically will apply in that environment, in that company in which you're looking to engage, and making it and picking up from Celia's point, when you speak of these aspects, that you also are able to speak authentically, and that there's authenticity in what you're speaking of. But the core skills, some of the fundamentals that have always been there will always be critical. The soft skills that Natalie is speaking of, as a marketer, for example, your ability to understand, the mindset, the needs or the unmet needs of your customer target, that doesn't go away. If anything, it becomes that much more critical to understand how that then relates to their, needs expressed or not expressed, as it relates to what they see as important when we talk about environmental or societal considerations. So I think, those basics that you will have picked up are key, but absolutely, also understanding the broader story, that technical aspect, the frameworks and so forth is key. And in turn, yes, how you can then translate that into the specific company or environment where you're looking to gain your next role. I think that's the trio that are absolutely key.
Awesome, thank you. And Celia, do you want to add to that as well? What in your perspective also, because you had like a lot of conversations also with people applying, what are these skills and these specific qualifications that are increasingly needed right now in the sustainability job market?
Yeah. I think honestly what the To Be For Me said is exactly what it is, and it's very difficult to find candidates that have a balance between both, or they're like this or they're like this, and it's all about seeing like what can you do to kind of create that balance. And you don't need a balance for some of the roles, right? But how can you create that kind of sensitivity? For me, the main two kind of elements that I would put like as a parallel under the blocks is humility and curiosity. So first of all, curiosity, because it's changing all the time. Like, every week there's a new regulation. Let's all change oh my God, there's ChatGPT now. Let's just do everything in regards to that, la, la, la. There's so much change going on that having that curiosity that's linked to agility is super important in a world that's constantly evolving. And the element of humility is, for me at least, super crucial, both as an employer, but also as an individual who's constantly learning still myself. I think it's really great to be ambitious and to have confidence, but if you don't see where those elements are that you still need to develop as a person, or even as a person, personally, but also in an organization, then your growth is going to stagnate at some point. So, for example, looking at some people in your organization where you think, that person is doing this and this greatly. And instead of just looking full with admiration, thinking, these and these sentences, I'm going to remind them to kind of like talk about them the next time that I have a meeting, or even like, maybe this person can become my mentor, or how can I learn from a little bit from this and a little bit from that. So I think those elements of really much humility and curiosity they're not skills, they're most traits, I would say, but they're super important in the area of sustainability, or even just in general, to succeed in your role.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the great advice. Alice, are there questions from the audience about specific skills relating to sustainability rules?
We have got one question. Well, that's a couple here I could ask, actually. Let's go with this one first. Looking internationally at the political climate, some countries are seeing an anti-climate change and anti-sustainability discourse. And do you feel the impact of these discourses at a corporate level? Is this a threat?
Natalie, can I pass that question first to you?
Yeah, certainly. I think obviously, I think regulation that is climate unfriendly or sustainability unfriendly is not great. So, and then with sustainability as well, I want to refer back to sort of the human part of sustainability. It's not great for the greater sort of scheme of things, but also it's not, if I'm going to kind of bring it down to this, it's not smart to be introducing regulation like that, because companies generally who also have a sustainability program won't be able to operate in countries that introduce sustainability unfriendly policies. Of course, we know it happens. And do I see it as a risk? It's not great. It's not, I don't think it's something that's going to massively derail global sustainability ambitions and activities and progress. It slows, it unfortunately creates space for companies that are and sustainable. And it's obviously an unfortunate reality this day and age. Like I said, it's not great. It's not a help towards sustainability, but I don't think that it provides a risk to sort of derail overall ambitions or activities. But let me know if that's complete. I know that there was a part from a corporate perspective, but I hope that answered it, unless there's more I should touch upon.
Yeah, and David, can you maybe add to that as well? Do you feel that there's a discourse surrounding that?
There is to an extent. I think the broader trend, again picking up a little bit from Natalie saying, the broader trend is one of embracing the core principles of sustainability. So I think that ship is moving, and that oil tanker, if let's use that analogy, it's a pretty tricky one now to turn around or somehow. I think that boat has left the port. Will there be and are there some areas of backlash? Of course there are. There always will be. We're talking about change. It's normal. And I would argue that this kind of dynamic is perhaps best seen as an opportunity. To understand, well, what are the drivers behind that, and okay, what is that discourse that maybe can be engaged in that can help perhaps shift opinion, or perhaps not. I mean, there are well-founded reasons perhaps behind some of the policies that I think the person is probably referring to. That's to be respected. Having said that, I think yes, it can be a concern, but I think it's one that not to dismiss it, because that would not be correct. It needs to be understood. It needs to be responded to, and ideally, in responding to it in dialogue, that can help move us along overall to what I do believe, at any rate, is a broader, as I said, societal transformation as we speak. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, thank you for that clear insight. Alice, are there any other questions that we'd like to address at this point?
Yeah, so we can probably go on to this one. Somebody would love to be a product manager, and they're wondering if you've got any tips for someone who wants to be a product manager in the sustainability field, and what opportunities exist for that position. Do any of you know?
David, maybe I can pass this one to you.
Well, I would maybe answer it not so much from the sustainability field, because I would just come back to what I was saying before, which is, any product management role in 2023, by definition, will have a very critical aspect to it, which is, considerations around sustainability, around the dimensions that we're talking about. So, I come back to the point again. A product manager is often can be seen as something of like the top gun within a company. So, the advice I would always give is, how can you in that role, which can be a very pivotal role, really help move on the sustainability objectives of the given company to which you would wish to be a product manager. That would be my base, my starting point. Obviously, there are some companies or some product management roles where the product itself may be more going in a sustainable direction. But I do take along a certain view that if we were to have this discussion in 5 years' time, if not even 5 years, we wouldn't even be using the word sustainability anymore. It's just a product manager. Right? It's just what it is. And I think that's the thinking that you need to have. And that's the kind of thinking you need to be thinking about for you to think about what your next steps will then be within that company that you're looking to apply to. So that's more how I would frame it as a piece of advice.
Thank you for that advice.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, having been a product manager myself, it's exactly what David was saying. It's really about not taking it as a trend. Like, don't go into the interview saying like, oh yeah, I built a capsule collection around sustainability. No, it really needs to be a given already that sustainability is embedded. And look at it. I think the main element for any product manager that works with products is looking at the element of circularity. So taking it as a given that the circularity element would be embedded to really disintegrate the product. So for example, for me, it was a t-shirt or a shoe, and looking at what is the way that I can have a modular approach to the product in order to look at it really from a circular perspective. And beyond that, hopefully you would be, I don't know, I'm talking to you, someone who wants a product manager role, will be in an organization where that is part of the toolkit of the strategy of the organization. And if this is not the case, to be a really big advocate for the driver of change. With of course knowing there's a long way to go then to drive that change. But still, I think these are the key kind of little tips I would have for you.
It's a great point, Celine.
Awesome, thank you. Alice, do we have some other questions still left?
We have one question left, so if anyone else has any questions, now would be your time to pop them into the Q&A box. The last question, and it's very industry specific, with the increasing move towards electric vehicles, what impact will sustainability have on the source of electricity creation for major industry providers?
Awesome, interesting, very interesting question, also specific question. David, can I pass this one to you, knowing that you did some on the car industry, in your previous roles?
It goes back a little while, but nonetheless, I think those trends have accelerated. But let me see if I understand. The question was relating to where energy will now be sourced.
That was how I read it, yes. But
Okay.
I guess if you've got experience in the vehicle industry, then let's hear what you learned.
Well, I think a few things. If we think about sourcing energy, so we can think of it from multiple different dimensions. But certainly one is, okay, if we talk about electric vehicles, the generation of that electricity in and of itself becomes a consideration. Is it responsibly generated electricity? That in and of itself becomes more and more of a point. So that I think is one element, and there will be more and more focus on, right, is the electricity that is being used to power my vehicle, is it being sourced through what? Renewables? Is it being done via coal? Is it done via nuclear? I think these will become bigger considerations. That's the first point. The second point would be, if you talk about the powering of the vehicle itself, energy in the sense of in lieu of petroleum, or now we talk about a battery. Well, here again, so what are some of the materials or minerals that are being used to basically create that battery? We talk about things like lithium. Will the importance of some of these elements become more and more key moving forward? Will the lithium producers of 2030 be the oil producers of 2000? Possibly so. And so I think that will also represent some significant shifts as well, where we talk about what becomes important in terms of the broader economies of various countries. We will, I'm sure, be in the years to come be speaking more of countries like Bolivia or Chile or Argentina as sources of lithium than perhaps we do today. So I think some of these considerations will very much have an impact. I hope that answers your question, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, thank you for that interesting also response to that, because I think that's very interesting to see as well, the shifts between the focus in countries and emerging markets in that sense. So thank you for that. Alice, do we have another?
Yes, one has literally just come through, so I haven't had a chance to look at it. I'm just going to read it straight out. I'm looking to switch into a sales role in sustainability, and I'm curious about how sustainability is promoted. Do you mainly emphasize its importance because of regulations, or do you focus more on highlighting the value of sustainable practices and the potential business opportunities they bring?
Awesome question. Natalie, maybe you can answer that.
Sure. So, I mean, it also depends a little bit what it is, if you're in a sales role, and what is it that you're really selling. I think it comes down to, the principle of sales is understanding your customer and understanding what your customer is trying to achieve as well. I think if it's a customer who's really focused on sustainability and that's sort of really the big pitch, that's the thing to underscore. If you're already operating in a space of sustainability, that's an expectation. But I think ultimately, it very much depends on what it is that you're selling, understanding the customer, and understanding how important sustainability is, if it's not the sort of primary objective of your product, I guess you could say.
If I can add something. First of all, I'm looking for salespeople in my organization if you're interested. No echo pitch. So the way that we look at it is exactly what Natalie was mentioning, is looking at, we call it the sustainability maturity curve. If you spook someone away with like very forward lingo, super advanced methodologies to someone who just wants to like dip their toe into like starting on the compliance side, then of course you've lost them before you kind of had a chance. But it's looking like, where do they stand? Are they on the initial stage, the medium, or the very mature stage? and how can you challenge them? So it's really about seeing how can you challenge them a little bit further than what they had plans ongoing if they already have those goals in place. And if they don't have the goals, then it's really about asking open questions as well. And I think one element that's very important that kind of I've switched a bit in throughout the years is the how fear-based are you? So it's all about like planetary boundaries. The planet is gonna burn, all of that. Like, I don't think this is the right approach in motivating even companies or anyone, but really looking at a very engaging way of understanding issues, understanding problems, and seeing how can you support in a positive way, with, of course, the connotation of the urgency that goes with it, because it would be a very unbalanced element if you would look at only one or the other. But in theory, only looking, really focusing on where they stand on the maturity level of the organization, if that makes sense to the person asking.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Celia. And looking at the time, we are already a little bit over. So in that sense, I would give one more time the floor to our panelists and ask them one last question each individually. So what kind of a final piece of advice would you give our audiences relating to a new sustainability-focused labor market and how they should attack it and approach it? Natalie, can I first ask you to hit off the floor?
Oh my God, keep picking on me first. I'm just joking. So I think the one thing that I feel most strongly about actually is really the balance between hard and soft skills. It's something that I see in my own organization and trying to drive forward our own sustainability agenda internally. I know it wasn't also in my previous functions, is really being able to balance that. And I think that's a really important balance to master. I think it is also something that can help determine one's success within an organization, is being able, at very least, really understanding the balance of both and how to apply both. So I think my biggest advice for in terms of sort of the skills and what to understand in a sustainability role that can help with success is that balance. But also sustainability isn't always in the place, or the most interesting sustainability isn't always in the place where you think it's going to be. I know myself, having entered, when I entered the labor market, was quite green. And I mean green in terms of naive about, where change really happens. And I know that I've worked at some of the places now that I said that I would never work at. But my reminder is that sometimes the change really happens in the places you don't think. And that was also the realization that I made when I transitioned from consulting into the corporate space. That's where also a lot of the money is to make change. But arguably, it's a really exciting time. There's so many different ways to sort of work in a purpose-driven manner. But so my advice is the balance, and be open and really seek out, try to understand where change happens. And I think that's where you'll find sort of the sweet spot of change.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you for that, Natalie. David, can I ask you to hit the floor?
Sure. I think Natalie's words are very wise. I maybe would just add maybe just two additional thoughts. When you start your journey and you are now looking for your next role, obviously that mix of hard and soft skills is key. I would add maybe two additional points to it. One is passion, and one is authenticity. I come back to that again. Do your homework where you're looking to apply. You need to believe that the company that you are applying for is authentic in their own objectives. Because if you're passionate about sustainability, and if you don't believe in the company that you're applying for, but you think it might be interesting enough, it will show. And that's maybe not the best place to be. You really want to focus on where you believe in what the company is doing, because I can assure you, in that scenario, guaranteed the people that you'll be working with will be equally passionate as you might be. And therefore, it becomes a very virtuous circle. One which has you engaging with people who will be very powerful in your future in terms of contacts, friends, colleagues, but also, for that matter, one which will minimize any frustration that you may encounter when you actually move into that actual environment. So don't fake it. Go authentically where you want to go. Make sure that your passion will be respected. I would simply add that layer.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you. And Celia, to hit it off for our audience, can you give your best advice regarding the labor market for our audiences?
The pressure. They each said two things. Huh? I don't want to say anything, but no, I think that they're both super right. And actually, those were going to be my initial points, what they both said. One thing that I find I'm going to leave you with is follow your instinct. So your intuition is very right. When I started my career, I had all those like sexy names, big titles, big salaries, la la la. And at the end, I chose for a little intern. Well, it was still for Adidas, but it was like an internship versus a full-time role, because the person I had the interview with, I thought, I really want this person to be my boss. And honestly, I zero have ever regretted it. So I would say, follow your intuition. Don't be scared, and think about the authenticity, the alignment between yourself and what that role would be. And if you have that right, then, you know, it will be the right first or second or third or 10th experience for you. So I'll leave you with one thing.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. That was amazing. So thanks a lot to all three panelists from my point of view. I really enjoyed it. Also from my perspective, being new on the job market, is really good to hear also from you how things have changed, how sustainability is now accessed like in every role, that we need the data and the transparency and the authenticity in those companies. So that's amazing. So thank you for that. And I would lastly quickly give the floor to Alice.
Thank you, Tom. So just to close off, a special thank you for joining us tonight, and a big thanks to our alumni who participated, Tom, Celia, David, and Natalie. We are very grateful for all of your insights. If you are watching along and you would also like to volunteer your time to give back to the alumni community like tonight's participants have done, please get in touch with us. We're always looking for volunteers. And don't forget to join us here again at the same time tomorrow night for the next Alumni Career Days event, where we will find out how to use science-based techniques to build resilience in the workplace. Thanks again, and good night.